Why are the basics level so hard to learn and to teach? Why are so many people struggling in that level? And what can we do in the community to change that experience? Well, let's find out. Hello everyone, and welcome back to ZoukNerds. In this 40th episode of Season 5, we're doing a special one, and we're inviting our guest, Raven Benko, to discuss the struggles of learning and teaching Brazilian Zouk, especially in the basics level. But we'll also deep dive on what are the things that one can do in the community to change that experience, not just for the students, but also for everyone who is learning to teach or already teaching for a while in the community, but wants to do a better job. So, let's go. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Alisson Sandi, and today we have our beautiful co-host once again, Gui Prada. Hello, Gui.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
And in today's episode, which is our 40th episode of the season, we have a very special guest, Raven Benko. Hello, Raven.
Hello, happy to be here. I feel very honored to be on your 40th of this season.
Yeah.
Nice.
First episode.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about the expectations and the reality of becoming a dance teacher. There's so many things that we talk to people all around the world, and also many advices that we share with people in person, and we want to bring this to you guys through this episode. But also, we want to talk to somebody who has a different but very relatable perspective of this side, which is being a dance teacher, but not being a full-time dance teacher, which is the case of our guest Raven here. But before I get into that, why don't we hear a little bit more about who is this Raven person?
Who am I?
Tell us, Raven, who are you?
So, I'm not a full-time dance teacher, as Alisson said, but I have been pursuing the art of Zouk since like 2015 or so. And I've started teaching very lightly, probably in 2018. First at Salsa Cantodo in Seattle. So I started my journey learning really deeply in Zouk at Salsa Cantodo and then began teaching there. And the universe brought me to DC in 2019 for different career options. And it was a whole different world that I really fell into and really fell in love with how District Zouk structures their teaching, which is when I really kind of got more into that side of the Zouk world. Before I was mostly a student going to events, dancing as much as I could, as everyone tends to do early on. And then went through, COVID, all sorts of processes, and found my first real dance partner, Adayu, who you've had on the podcast before. He now teaches in Portland with Dublin, but he and I partnered for about a year and a half or so, 2 years dancing, and were able to bring kind of like our own vision to Colorado. We did some teaching kind of outside of any school setting, but just with the students in the community that we knew there. And then went back, did teaching in Seattle again, and then we both came back to DC. And since then, I've really dove into really deeply the teaching in District Zouk as a lead, which has been a whole new experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the journey has taken me in a lot of different places, in a lot of different communities, and I've learned so much. But we, as Alisson said, we run into these conversations with people a lot who want to either grow their community locally, or they are excited by the challenge of becoming an instructor, or whatever the reason is. And that process is often very different than what people expect it to be. Yeah.
And at certain points, I remember you were flying to, I think, Denver every week.
I was. So
you were living in Seattle doing like school?
I was in grad school in Seattle, and Adayu and I were teaching in Colorado on Tuesday nights. And so I would leave class at like 3 p.m., fly to Colorado, teach. We would take a quick nap in the studio, and then I'd get back on a flight at 5 a.m. and go back to class.
Raven was flying weekly
Flying weekly, yes.
In and out of
To
Colorado.
pursue this teaching thing.
Exactly. So people don't complain. Yes. Complain.
Anytime we went to classes in Colorado and people were tired, I was like, you don't get to be tired. Guess what I did to get here?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember that for some time. So you had the experience teaching in Seattle, teaching in Denver, and teaching in DC. Was it the same capacity? Like same structure where you had continuously teaching beginner classes or intermediate classes? What was the crowd you were teaching in Seattle versus Denver?
Yeah. Seattle, they structure most of their classes around teams. So the people who are like really interested in committing and learning for big chunks of time would go into a team. I think they were doing it on a yearly basis when I was teaching there. So you would have a group of students for a year. But I never taught one of those teams. I started teaching one of those teams at one point, but I was doing more of the weekly classes. So for all the people who are waiting to get into a team, which sometimes started to build up a lot of students because cycles were pretty long, we would do only 4-week classes, believe it or not, of a Zouk 1, a Zouk 2, or a Zouk 3. It was just the very basics. And then we also did drop-in classes. And
the beginner people.
More the beginning people, yeah. I did a few like kind of special topics classes here and there with people in Seattle that were a little bit more advanced. But yeah, that was right when I started teaching, and most of it was the beginner crowd. And we didn't really have a set curriculum of any kind. It was kind of, the basics, teach them. And
have fun.
Have fun. And the student body at Salsa Cantora primarily is bachata salsa students. Yeah. And we've been growing the Zouk scene there. It's gotten much bigger from when I started there. There's also a little kizomba scene there now. But yeah, so it would be students who were coming into Zouk either just to try it out and go back to salsa and bachata, or, coming to try to learn a specific move to take it back to salsa and bachata. And then sometimes it was the people who were waiting to get into the teams. And so they were taking Zouk 1 over and over and over because it's all they had,
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting structure. And then in Denver, Adayu and I kind of built our own thing. So we had 2 different levels that we would teach. It was our basically intro to Zouk, for lack of a better word, level. So we start at basics in place and move up to wherever we got the students to go. And then we had a second level where we did a little bit more pattern work, body movement, some head movement stuff. And the students kept asking for more head movement, more advanced, whatever. And we were like, nope, not ready yet. That was like a very different experience because we built our curriculum and we had week by week what we wanted to do, and we would revise it based on the students that we had, as opposed to getting offered like new students every 4 weeks and not knowing what to expect.
I wanted to say to people is that we met in 2018, I think. I think in the summer. And Raven was part of the Holy Triad of Seattle. The Holy Triad of followers in Seattle. It was you, Rose, and Kelsey were like this mythological trio of followers that we and they were like really, really incredibly high-skilled dancers, and then that eventually became teachers. And I think that sometimes it's the pathway of several people in several scenes where they grow from knowing more of the dance and dancing really well into, sometimes this process happens organically, that you fall into teaching or you are offered the position to teach. And going into it, there might be all these expectations of what you are going to teach versus what you are actually teaching and who you are actually teaching. And like you said, you were teaching other dances people who were learning Zouk stuff to take to their dance. So they were there mostly for the meats, the sugar, like Alisson likes to say, patterns. And some people were there to really learn the dance. And these were the ones waiting for the teams in Seattle. And this episode was inspired exactly by a conversation we were having about people that we know. They are frustrated that they want to teach, but when they do get to teach, they don't teach who they would like to teach, or they don't teach the contents that they would like to teach. And we had you had all these amazing insights that inspired me to come to Alisson and say, Alisson, let's bring Raven into the show, and have her share a little bit of that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that conversation boiled down to teaching the basics is hard, and a lot of people don't want to do it. But it's so necessary. It's like you're eating your vegetables every day as a teacher, like you really have to strengthen your backbone and walk into that class of people who are either never, moved like we move in Zouk before, or have moved in different dance forms and are trying to retrain their body for Zouk, and having to have enough knowledge and understanding of all of the basic movements to really give what each student or each group of students needs is so difficult. And I find I really started seeing this when I started teaching as a lead at District Zouk. So I was before teaching as a follow primarily. And when I started teaching in Colorado with Adayu, I realized that just being a follow body and talking about the follow part was not good enough, because I would go up to students who were struggling on something we were working on, and I would know the lead was doing something wrong, but I wouldn't know how to correct the lead. So I was like, I only know the follow part. And so Adayu and I worked really hard on getting me more comfortable with the leader side of things. And before we taught any class, I was like, I have to be able to lead this before we go into class, because I'm not giving the students what they need if I don't. And I prefer teaching as a follow. It's so much easier for me because it's just natural. It's in my body. I don't have to think. And I don't have to really pay attention to each one of my movements, because it is like all muscle memory at this point. But as I started teaching as a lead, it's opened my mind as a dancer and really broadened my technique in general. But I've also noticed like how much there is to dive into as an instructor before you can really service your students well.
Yeah, I think those are two great points that you made there, where not only something that we talk about a lot here in ZoukNerds, that whenever you have the opportunity, go back and learn the opposite role, whether you are a student or a teacher. Well, yeah, if you're a teacher, I think it's kind of like mandatory, to be honest. A teacher needs to know both sides, not to be amazing at both sides, but they need to know both sides to do exactly what he said, provide the correct feedback instead of asking the partner, going like, hey, can you do your footwork here? I don't know your footwork, or I don't know what you're doing here. And the other thing as well that you mentioned that I think it's really important to bring back is that expectation that a lot of people have when they're teaching. They think they're going to teach the cool moves and all of those things. But in the end of the day, the community is based on the biggest amount of people that you can bring in. It's kind of like the top of the funnel. And it's something that you can really see with a teacher who only travels on the weekends and don't teach regular classes. For me, from the perspective that I have, it's much easier to be a traveling teacher than it is to be a local teacher that teaches community building and grow their own thing from zero. Because one thing is for you to just show up in a class that everybody knows how to dance and you're teaching them a move or teaching them a new technique. But the other thing is to be there every week with the same people and making sure that they feel inspired, they feel encouraged, they feel like they're capable of continuing, and also feeling excited, interested, passionate about the thing. Such different skills. And I think it's very clear when you see a teacher that is teaching in a congress or a festival, but they are like local teacher versus that same event, a teacher who is mostly a traveling teacher and doesn't teach locally. They can teach the same class, but it's going to be so, so different with the amount of details, the progression, the layering, and all of those things that I think when people don't go through the experience, they don't get. And I think that brings back to the point of understanding the expectation and the reality of what do you want. Do you want to become a famous teacher that travels and go to congresses and everything? Well, then there is a path. But that path does not necessarily connect with the path that you may want to choose in the future, which is, I want to settle down. I want to build my own thing. Because it's almost like starting from zero again in terms of the lessons and the bumps and the things that you're going to go through, and vice versa. So I think it's a great summary and reminder of the things that we go through in the community.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like bringing advanced concepts to a group of students who are ready for it is so fun.
Yeah.
And so enjoyable. The students are already inspired. They've already made it to this level and they're ready. They crave that information. And they've done mostly a lot of the hard work to get to where they are, right? And it's a really fun and easier class to teach, I found. There, of course, are a lot of intricacies and when you go into head movement work and when you go into like complex patterning, but you're not teaching people how to transfer their weight. You're not teaching people how to not hunch when they're taking their step or put their hips backward in weird ways, You're not building the body from the ground up. It's already there for you and you get to play with it. And those are such fun classes to teach. We all love those,
And those people are already addicted.
Exactly, yes.
They're already buying the drug.
Mm-hmm. They're already buying the drug, and so you don't have to work as hard. I found that like a lot of what I do in the basics classes is convince people that they need to know this knowledge.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. They're like, what? But like, why are we still doing our linear basic? And I'm like, trust me, please. Like, you need to have this before you can go on. And you get a lot of people questioning you in the lower levels a lot more. And you really have to like stand your ground firmly a lot of the time and say, I'm not going to give you things you're not ready for. And it's going to be better for you. I know you don't believe me now. Maybe you're mad at me now, but I'm going to give you your carrots, force you to eat them, your spinach and your broccoli. And like, you'll be stronger for it in the later date. And sometimes, which has happened to me, I've been teaching the basics classes for like 6 months, 8 months now, and haven't taught any of the upper level ones, is that my students come through and then they go, poof, and they're up doing really cool things. I don't get to see them anymore. So I'm like, I hope you're doing well up there. Like, but then I get another group of students who come through. So it's been a really interesting transition to go into teaching more of the basics classes consistently and more as a lead, almost primarily. And I think it really requires a choice from you as an instructor to decide really why you're here. Like, why are you here teaching these students? Because it's much easier to go, oh, I'm going to do a weekend class on Tualia. And whoever is going to come and they'll get what they get and it'll be really fun. And, what a lot of teachers do to like keep themselves employed is they travel around and they do the really cool things and they bring their amazing talent to all these students. And that is an amazing way to go about this dance as well. But the other side of it is like readying our students for those really amazing high-level people to come in and teach them even more, And it is so required to keep your community alive, to like sit down in the trenches with your students and keep them growing weekly, keep them inspired weekly, and keep them loving thinking about where their big toe is pointing weekly. And
where the knees are.
Where the knees shoulders. And I had this amazing experience. It can be so rewarding. I'm saying it's so hard, but I have this student who's older, in his 70s probably, who's been going through our basics. He did our basics 1 twice. And from the first time I taught him basics 1 to now he took a private with me, his posture changed from hunched over and like really, crunched to like he's a tall man now. And it's only been, I guess 16 weeks.
No, even yesterday was our last class of basics 1. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 followers there who came strongly from salsa and bachata, so had a strong muscle memory. And they were more serious, more, a little bit more removed. And yesterday, they were like smiling, hugging me, super cozy. I don't know what happened. Maybe they woke up and the download was completed. Mm-hmm. I have this theory of the download. Like you are learning and then your body is downloading the content. And then when it's completed, you wake up with a whole new body,
That happened to me as a follow.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that happened to them. And that part is so rewarding because when you mention that teaching the basics hard, it's hard emotionally because you have to, keep bringing people in. I also wanted to tell the story of that guy that used to say, no, this doesn't make sense, in your class. So you also have these happenings in your class, in our classes sometimes. And it can also be extremely rewarding when you get the group. I think when you get the group or you get most people of that group, then it starts flowing really well.
Mm-hmm.
The basics courses tend to be the courses that is harder to get the group.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get the group, then it's just joy and fun. But until you get them, that's where it's very, very tricky.
Yeah, so I had this student too who was a salsa bachata student in my basics 1. No, basics 2. I can't remember. But it was an evening class. So we have 2 classes in the evenings, an earlier and a later. It was the later class on like a Tuesday. And everyone would come to that class so drained, like already asleep. Like they've already had 2 days of work and they're like, oh, I'm in the middle of my week. And it was such a challenge, and it still is. I keep teaching this one slot. I think it's my ultimate challenge is to get through teaching Tuesdays at the late slot. And we had this one student who every beginning of every class came very like antagonistic, like didn't even want to be there. We'd be doing warm-ups and he'd barely be moving. I'd be like, come on, move your feet. Like, we got to warm up. And he'd just be like, And then we'd be, for the first 30, 40 minutes of the class, be doing a movement. And he was always like, I don't understand why you're doing it like this. And I'd be like, okay, well, in salsa, we would do it like this. I'm like, great. We're not doing salsa. We're doing Zouk. I'm like, can I tell you how it's different? Well, I don't know. I don't think I'd ever do it like this if I were actually dancing. I'd be like, okay, I'm not quite sure why you're here, but great. I mean, I wouldn't say that, and it was him and I would like every class without fail have this like little argument of like, why are we doing it like this? And then halfway through the class, something would click in his body and he'd be like smiling and laughing and having the best time of his life. And it was the weirdest experience to like get through that first like 40 minutes to convince him that this is what we need to do. And then he'd be like, oh, okay, great. Now this is super fun. And like we were teaching a body roll at one point and he like almost wouldn't even try. And I was like, you can make it really small. It can work with your body. And he's like, I hate them and I would never do them in a dance. So I don't think I need to learn them. And I was like, okay, if you're continuing in Zouk, do you want to do head movement at some point? And he's like, yeah, like that's the coolest part. I'm like, you got to learn a body roll. You can't do head movement without that. And then he was like, okay. And so he started learning,
and eventually they leave.
Yeah. And sometimes you can't keep them. Sometimes they just
like drain your soul and leave. That's sometimes so hard, no? But that's one thing that I think we learned is in the present moment, that's what's happening. If this person stays or if this person goes, it's in the future. Mm-hmm. In the beginning though, it's like I put all my soul. We had spent all this time to make this one person do their body roll and then they just leave. So that can be sometimes really soul crushing. And I know it is for some teachers around the world. I have received questions sometimes is, how do you go about the fact that you're putting so much time and effort and they just leave and they just go away? How do you go about that? So I have questions like this before and got me thinking, how do I go about that? And then I realized that I don't go about that. It's just this new group that is coming in. So it's basically living in the present, trying to keep them in, trying to keep them engaged, trying to retain, mostly to grow the scene and mostly to increase the numbers of people dancing so we can have more healthier ecosystem of classes, but detaching from keeping them.
And I think I've asked you this question too. Like, Guy, how do you stay so zen all the time? How do you not really get your ego involved in teaching and keeping the students and everything? And it can feel very personal when someone takes a class with you and then abandons the whole dance. And you're like, what did I do? They don't even want to try anymore.
When you see the person leaving, mid-class.
That's hard.
Exactly. So, but I think now we are coming to the point of accepting when it's really not the time for the person. And that's okay. And also putting some sort of standards for ourselves too, I think. And that's the next stage. Who we want to teach.
Yeah.
Who we want to have in class. Kind of idea, né? Because we were mentioning the weekenders. And I think that's the desire of people that want to teach. They want to teach topics and concepts and cool things that are normally on the weekends. We received requests like that already, received questions like that already. And one thing that is interesting, except for Taipei, where Alisson is, even if you do a super cool topic on the weekends, who comes? Who comes in the US, in Europe, the beginner come. So you are still with that crowd, except for Taipei, where you do like a cool topic and the people who can actually understand more in depth that topic, then they come in numbers, in big numbers. You are still teaching the beginners. And that's something too, because then sometimes, you get your need met. I'm going to teach a cool concept. Here it is, here's the workshop. But then you get to the class and then you realize you cannot actually go to the concept. You need to work on the foundation, you need to work on everything before, and you don't get to go there. And I think that is another aspect too. Even if you get to do the cool stuff, you don't actually get to do the cool stuff. And how many times you and I and Alisson too remembers that we got this little clash sometimes with people who wanted to teach, that they wanted to teach certain things, and then we would say, not yet. Not yet. This thing first. And then they go ahead and do their thing. And then they come to us. We receive messages. Hey, how do you guys go about teaching this thing to these people? How do you approach this topic with these people? Because the reality smacks them on the face. And I think that was something that happened to several teachers, several people who started teaching, that I think they underestimated what it required. They underestimated who is actually going to come. I still underestimate who's actually going to come.
Yeah.
Severely. We put out something expecting a certain crowd, but they don't come.
Completely different. Yeah. And sometimes we have to try to sneakily name classes to be like, I need these people to come to this class and learn this thing. I need them to learn this thing, but I know they won't come unless I call it Tualia.
Yes.
Call it Tualia, and then I actually teach them what I want to teach them.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I think in Zouk there are a couple names that people become like meerkats. Then you see advanced.
Yep.
Tualia, tornado. You call their attention.
Head movement. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just drop a little bit of my 2 cents on this. When you guys were talking about not feeling good about leaving the class, I think on top of everything that you guys mentioned, I also detach myself by thinking, I could never be the right teacher for everybody. They're going to go and learn in another school with another teacher or in the same school with another teacher. Good for them. As long as they continue learning or as long as they continue being happy and dancing, good for them. Because with the experience that I have, I know what is good for them for that period. And if you don't know, that's fine. Ask for advice from more experienced people, whether in your community, somewhere near your community, or ask us, what would you do in this kind of situation? Get some coaching, get someone to help you if you don't know. But I think in the end is setting the boundaries and setting the expectations. Hey, we want you to learn this because these things are in line with becoming a good, inclusive, adaptable social dancer. And this is what we build in this community. Okay, so I think that's something that I value a lot. I cannot be the best teacher for everybody. And on that, I wanted to ask you, Raven, if I was a student today who wants to start teaching, very excited, very passionate. I've done all your classes. I'm somewhat a good student by your level, you've told me before. What would you tell me in terms of the expectations that you think I might have versus the reality that you would prepare me as a good teacher and mentor to hey, I understand this is what you want, but let's have a real conversation about this.
That's a great question.
How would you help me?
I think the biggest thing is that you can go into a class with a plan, but you have to be ready to completely change the plan at any moment's time. And teaching drop-in classes was really helpful for learning that. I find drop-ins at any level the hardest class to teach of all time.
Oh my God, yes.
And I have nightmares about it. I had a nightmare the other night where I taught a drop-in class and it was just me and 80 students showed up and half of them weren't listening to what I was saying. They were all trying their own thing. And I was trying to engage the whole class and it was just, I couldn't talk loud enough. These people couldn't take one step forward and these people were doing something, from West Coast swing over there. And so you can come in with a plan of like what maybe let's say I need to get to from basics in place through lateral today. And you'll get maybe to basics in place with some groups of students and you'll get to lateral 15 minutes through the class and have to do even more than that with a different group of students, right? And learning how to be flexible and adaptable in the moment is crucial because if you freeze in front of the students, it's really hard to get the momentum back up and present yourself like you are fully knowledgeable on the subject, right? Because if I've only prepared for this one thing and I can't teach anything else because I haven't prepared myself for it yet, or I haven't, written it out in my to-do list for the class, for me, it feels like you're not really, truly ready to jump in with a group of students because every student is going to need something different and every group of students is going to need something different and take something farther than you meant to or in a different direction than you meant to. And being able to adapt to who you have in front of you is a really crucial skill to have. And that requires practicing it in small doses, right? Like I feel like we have a lot of people in that situation, Alisson, where they're like, I'm a good Zouk dancer. I understand all the things. Like I think I'm ready to teach. Mm-hmm. And they want to start right away with like a whole series class with, I'm going to do basics 1, 2, and 3 at this place. And here, I'm going to get this group of students. And that as your first teaching experience is really hard. And so doing it in smaller doses and even doing it consciously in classes you're taking as a student before you start teaching. Like I did a lot of observing at District Zouk. I was kind of thrown into the deep end in Seattle. And that's also a way you learn, but I don't think I could remember any of the students I taught or if they even would remember me or got anything out of the classes. I have no clue. I was just trying to swim in those classes, right?
You were there.
So if you're trying to do it really purposefully and you want to try to service the students as best as you can, like start watching how your favorite teachers teach, right? And it might be, I'm going to come to your basics class and just observe. Do you mind if I take notes? I would be totally fine with that. I'd be like, yeah, come see how we do it. And then at District Zouk, we structure it so that the people who are looking to teach can come in first as an assistant and kind of, be less responsible for the direction of the class and the cadence and choosing which exercises and music and stuff, but can still see what's happening with the students in real time and what decisions the lead instructor is making to help shape that class. But that can also be a really passive role. Like you can just show up and I'm here and I'm not paying attention and whatever. And then you've been doing it for a year and you're like, well, why am I not ready? Why is it so hard when I try to do it myself? It's like, because there's a lot of absorption that I think needs to happen. Like, not just absorption.
Yeah, like be open to the osmosis process of active observation.
Yeah. And then also getting past the nerves is another thing. So like I still to this day get nervous and I've been teaching for 6 years or so. And there was a basics 2 class I taught recently, that Tuesday evening class. And Guy decided to show up as a student in the class. And I was like, teaching with Guy, so easy. Teaching for Guy, terrifying. It would be the same if Alisson was in my class. And like, I remember I would do a thing and then look at Guy and I'd be like, great. Okay, good. I'd do another thing and be like, is this right? Yeah, you have to, it's a hard thing. It's a really emotional process as a teacher. You really have to like, let yourself make mistakes. Also let yourself learn from those mistakes and learn from the mistakes of others. And then you also have to know like where you're strongest. And all of that takes practice and time. And like taking the small steps to do it, I think makes it so you don't burn out right away,
Yeah.
And you don't like try to teach a whole group of students all at once and think, oh my God, this is so hard and I don't know what I'm doing and I don't want to blah, blah, and then you just stop,
Yeah. what I see most people falling into is that they start really excited and they go through this process of accepting this is the crowd I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach the beginner, the newcomers, with the hopes of one day teaching this other stuff. And they start seeing how long it takes to get there. And I'm doing basic stuff again and again and again and again. So I got so many questions about how do you do basics every single week? Again and again and again and again and again. And I've seen some people falling off the excitement train because they didn't see a way to take people to that place that they want them to be so they can teach this thing that they really want to teach. And I think it's more this idea of underestimating how long it takes for people to actually get there. And it's something that Alisson was saying about when you are just teaching weekends, né? Because you don't see the process. You don't see how long it takes to get a person from having 3 legs or 1.5 leg to doing head movements. Like in between these two, so like checkpoints is way longer than we think sometimes. Of course, we have the Dennis that do all the classes and then progress like boom, go like really quickly. But you do have people that Zouk is something they do on a Tuesday nights, you know, and that process takes longer, né? And how do you keep yourself motivated to keep teaching the beginner stuff every 2 months over and over again?
I think for me, strangely enough, teaching is what has kept me in Zouk for so long. I started out as a social dancer, learning as much as I could, and I, of course, fell in love with the feeling of Zouk and doing all the cool things and going to all the events and
I remember
dancing with all the people, and and I was that way for a long time. And then I had a pretty severe whiplash injury at one point in my following career. And I realized that I had to retrain my body how to do all of my movements because I was not keeping myself safe in head movement at all. I was going crazy, kamikaze, which can be really fun, but I didn't have the muscles to keep myself safe. I went back to the roots of the dance, and that's where I started to find the beauty of it again with what my body could do. Because it was a probably year and a half period where I really had to be very careful with doing any head movement advanced stuff. So I went back to the basics, was fortunate enough to learn from our basics masters in DC for a while. And then I started teaching it. And the beauty of learning your own body through dance is what I try to give to the students, right? It's not about making it look a certain way or whatever. It's about how your body can feel and how you can see things change, how you can see yourself get stronger and more balanced and move differently and connect with people better and listen more and all these things that you really build as a basics dancer. And so coming to basics every week is just a practice of that and a reminder of that for myself. Even when I start teaching the advanced classes, all the time I'm we got to stop and weight transfer. What is happening with your weight transfers, guys? We got to go back. We got to go back. Because I also, I don't want other follows to go through an injury like I did too. So I try to be really intentional about, making sure people understand the gravity of what they're putting their body through, and then it needs time to get to a certain level. And you need to be able to understand the limitations and the flexibility and mobility of your own body too. And then you get these beautiful moments where you have a 70-year-old man who grew 4 inches just because he learned how to hold his shoulders upright and brace his core a little bit better. And he walks around now like he's 20 years younger, just from a small stint in basics classes. So you have to find the little victories like that. And I really enjoy watching different bodies progress through the basics classes because some people will have problems with their ankles. Some people have problems with their knees, some with their hips, some with their stress in their shoulders, and each one of those seems like a challenge for me that I get to try to dissect in each basics class. And even if they leave after 1 session, 2 sessions, they've, I think, taken something better into their body to the rest of their world, which is nice.
Yeah, the problem-solving aspect of it is really rewarding.
Yeah, I love it. And when people ask me, how do you teach the same class for so long? And for me, the answer is very simple. What same class? it's never the same class. It's never the same class. Even if it's the same people, it's not the same class. Okay, so like when you go with the mentality that you are the teacher, but you don't make the decisions like 1000%. A lot of the decisions are made like by what is there.
100%.
You know, so like, do I have to make the decisions of how many songs, how many of these, how many drills, how many, all of those decisions, they need to be flexible and adaptable. Like you guys were saying, being ready for anything. Because in reality, the decision will be presented to you either at the start of the class when technically you have 30 students enrolled, but only 2 have showed up on time for the warm-up. Now you're like, what the hell? What am I going to do in this class? Is anybody coming? And then 10 more show up in the middle of the warm-up, and it's a head movements class. And then by the end of the warm-up, everybody showed up, which means most of the group did not do any of the drills that you've just spent 15, 20 minutes doing in the warm-up. For those of you who don't know, in District Zouk or in any of our classes anywhere we teach, our warm-ups are long. They're drills, 15, 20 minutes. And then the students show up after that, and you're like, oh my God, I can't do the exercise that I planned now because the students, they need what they don't have. And so yes, first, it's never the same class. And 2, you have to be ready for anything. And maybe lastly, if you don't love teaching and you don't have that passion for helping people, which I think comes with a lot of patience as well and understanding and empathy, if you don't have those things, maybe teaching is going to be too stressful and frustrating. I'm not sure. I think that it's kind of like parenting, but your kids can leave anytime. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, depends on situation, but it's like parenting. You are going to invest everything that you have in that moment, in that hour, and you may never see them again. And be okay with it. It's totally fine.
Like maybe here in the US when the kids go to college thing, but they can go to college at any time. They're always going to college.
Yeah, they go, bye-bye.
Bye.
Wait, what?
Wait, what? Yes. I think it is like a labor of love in many instances because several times I think when people say that they like teaching, that they would love to start teaching, they don't realize that they will be teaching sort of the same content for a long period of time. And then it's like you're saying, like finding the rich aspect of teaching the same concept because you are not actually teaching the same concept. You are actually teaching all these different bodies about themselves and locking into this idea of, I'm teaching viradinha for the 50,000th time in my life, but I'm actually helping all this group of people learn how to pivot, how to step and having awareness of their balance, controlling their momentum, not using too much of this, too much of that, and finding comfort and ease of motion. Then you are never bored. You know, I think the challenging part of it is really all these things we talked before, the group, the time of the day, you know, the later time slots, everybody's tired, all of that.
Nobody shows up for warm-up.
Nobody shows up for warm-up. Or when people are warm-up, they're like, you know, kind of doing it.
Yeah.
You know, so these things are the challenging parts, I think. More of the challenging parts are there. And of course, we have the whole process of planning class, delivering the content. What do you do? How do you do? Because my case, for example, when I started teaching, I went straight into nothing at all, into teacher, you know, like right away. And so all I had was everything I learned by being a student. So I needed to bring all this stuff out right away. And that helped me a lot. And that is something that I think people who want to teach, maybe do more actively. Observe who teaches already and take note of what are the things that they do. You know, I learned so much from just watching Alisson teach and applying so much of the principles, how much time he leaves for people to practice, how he goes.
Hard he makes you work in the warm-up.
Yeah, organizing all these things. So, you know, learning so much. In every class, you learn a new little tool that this teacher is using. But I think for you to learn it, you need to be open to observe, open to listen with these ears that I'm not only taking the class, but I'm also learning how to teach the same class, and then you can learn anywhere, anytime. Any congress you go, any festival you go, any class you go, you can always be learning. And the thing sometimes that people are waiting to be taught how to teach, trained how to teach, without considering there is ongoing opportunities to learn how to teach by observing.
And I go nowadays, when I'm at congresses, I go to classes not as a student. I go to just watch how they're teaching class. And I usually, if I join the class, I do it in my less preferred role, because that makes me really pay attention to what the teachers are saying. And so oftentimes I'll be there as a lead. And I've had people break down something as simple as a vie de genie in a way that I'm like, that makes so much sense. Like,
it's much better than what I've been doing.
So much better than what I've been doing. You need to incorporate things like that. And you become a student in a very different way. And I think that can be really cool, but also very challenging, where, at least for me, I've felt that my focus has changed pretty significantly when I'm at events, right? The social dancing side of things has become harder for me to tap into a lot of the times. Like, when I'm dancing as a lead, I'm really in my head, which I think is common for most leads, at my level at least. And when I'm dancing as a follow, sometimes I'm like analyzing and being like, oh, what would I teach this person? That's like, what would I do? Or I'm like analyzing my own body, being like, oh my gosh, people are watching me. Because you hold a different level in the community when you start teaching. And so you have eyes on you all the time. And I'm constantly humbled in classes by people who are watching me do something and they go, well, you said to do that, but you just did this. And I'm like, do what I say. And you have to be really careful with that. And so then I'm like, dancing with a student and I'm like, oh my gosh, my pivot and my left that out is not how I would want my student's pivot to be. I've got to really, really pay attention to that. And sometimes the freedom in the social dancing, for me at least, has been harder to tap into because I'm so conscious of everything now. Whereas before, especially as a follow, coming to a social was like a meditation experience for me. It was like my brain was blank and I was just letting someone else kind of dictate movement and things like that and reacting to it. And it was very a body experience. And now it's almost entirely in my head. And that is, I think, another thing that you have to consider when you're transitioning into this different role is your relationship to the dance might change quite significantly.
I think this could be a whole new episode. Just to talk about this one thing, we could go deep into this part there as well.
Yes, that is a great topic, and there's so much that we can talk about, but I think you know what I'm about to say. We're a little bit out of time for this episode. I think we're holding ourselves to the chair to not talk on top of each other because when we're in the same room, it's a mess. So let's get together again in the next episode where we're going to have Ki and Raven back with us to continue these conversations. So for now, thank you for being here. Beijos, abraços, and ciao.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.